Your story is a powerful one, and I think it's really important that we start off by hearing that story so that all of our listeners and viewers can really not just hear your story, but probably connect their own stories in hearing what you have to share.
Thanks so much. Well, my story, I grew up in Marathon, Ontario. It's a small town in northern Ontario, right on the tip of Lake Superior. It was a pulp and paper town. I grew up with 5 kids in our family. It was a beautiful place to live. It was a difficult place as well because I grew up in a family of alcoholics. My dad had his own business that wasn't doing well, and when I was 17, my father died by suicide. It was at a time in my life where I was transitioning. Growing up in a small town, you have to leave to go to college. You don't stick around. So this was February, and in September of that year, or August of that year, I headed out west to Calgary. So although it was a huge impact on me, I don't think I really felt the whole impact for years to come. So many years later, I would never hide the fact that my father had died by suicide. For some reason, I could talk about it. We're all very different, and that's okay, even in my own family. I had good friends and I had profs. I was doing sociology and criminology, and they helped me talk about it. I didn't realize it at the time, but they allowed the conversation to take place. And so I talked about it. One of the interesting pieces over the years, becoming a paramedic and firefighter, and I do a lot in my community, is not only would I share my story, and when I would share my story, people would engage in a conversation about it. They would ask questions about it because I would share. But often what people would say to me is, Scott, I would never picture you tied to suicide.
Interesting.
And as a photographer, it begged the question. So they saw me as this mask that I wear, this father, firefighter, paramedic, athlete, whatever it was, it didn't fit, or how I was talking about it. And they'd say, I wouldn't picture you tied to suicide. So when I went to look for what that was, all I found was cold, dark text, usually about grieving, and never that you could do anything about it. So that's where the idea for the project came from. And with that, I thought, if my one story can help, imagine a book of stories of families from, or people from across the country.
So the project you're referring to is the Collateral Damage Project, which is, initiated by you and what you're talking about. You've been traveling across our beautiful country, holding space and listening to the stories of families who have been affected by suicide.
Yes.
What has that been like?
Well, going back to the beginning, we launched on a radio show, a call-in radio show, and people, it was 1 hour from across Ontario, and people called in to share their stories. It started with actually Alex Bowman, one of Canada's greatest ever swimmers, sharing the loss of his brother.
Yes.
And so right then, when that happened, it went from a local regional project to this national project. And then I shared my story and invited people to share theirs. And it was an hour of powerful healing and difficult stories. But what we kept hearing throughout the hour was gratitude. Thank you for letting me share my story. When we were done that 1 hour, when we launched the project, a reporter, a journalist from the station had said to me, Scott, what do you think you just did? And I was able to answer it really easily because it was so clear. I said, we gave people an invitation to tell their stories, and we gave them permission.
Yes.
Without judgment or blame or shame.
Oh my goodness, that is huge. I think exactly what you just said, judgment, blame, and shame really causes so much pain.
It was just taken out. And within weeks after that, I had received over 1,000 stories.
Really?
They just flooded in. People wanted to share. When they were given permission, they will.
Given permission in an environment, like you said, where there isn't any judgment, where there isn't shame, there's such a stigma associated with suicide. And there's this entire family and friends that are left behind when someone passes by suicide. Can you speak to some of the actual stories as you go across our country? Just about, that you've had the honor of listening to, and what that stigma is still like to this day when we talk about suicide.
Well, there's so many. I could talk for hours,
there's a whole
literally.
book.
There is, and stories about the stories, and that's what's becoming incredibly interesting and powerful. But I think one that hit me originally, within a few days after launching, it was a woman in her 80s who called me from Southern Ontario, who had lost her brother to suicide when he was 20 years old. And I was the second person she ever told.
And she's 80 years old.
She's 80 years old.
Wow.
And she really, and she called not just to tell her story, but she was patient and she just wanted to spend time with me on the phone. And one of the things she said when her brother died is that they sat around the table, they got all the extended family together, sat around the table and came up with the story of how her brother died. And once they figured out what the story was going to be, it quickly moved to pass the potatoes.
That was it.
And that was it.
Yeah.
And it stayed that way. And when she phoned me, she said, this changes everything.
Wow.
That we were able to do this. And one of the analogies that she got onto is that she talked about the stigma of cancer. Mm-hmm. And I'm at an age where I remember that, kind of. So I said to her, I said, I understand. I remember that time when you couldn't really talk about cancer. I said, but this is different. And she said, that's what we said about cancer. Mm-hmm. And she said, because you've started this conversation, it's going to change everything when people can tell their stories. And I think that's the piece.
Absolutely.
There's such, we were talking about the people left behind, there's such a feeling of burden that they were not able to do something to save that person, that they didn't see a sign or a series of signs, or that they failed them somehow. And I know it's very difficult. You just talk to those people and walk them through it and just let them get that out? Is that part of the process? Just sort of...
Another story which is really powerful, I think one of the things that I've learned in the last 8 years, and a fellow by the name of Kevin Hines helped me tremendously on this. Kevin is an amazing advocate out of San Francisco. Kevin actually jumped off the Golden Gate Bridge and lived. And so when I first saw a documentary on him, he speaks about, as my hand left the bridge, I knew I wanted to live. And my connection was, as soon as he said that, I thought, if my father could see my 2 boys, he would want to live. Right. So I reached out, and Kevin and I have become quite close. But one day, Kevin and I were on the phone, and I said, Kevin, I don't understand how you got to where you were. He says, okay, I'll help you with that. He said, have you got a pin nearby? I said, yeah. He says, go get it. So I went to get it, and when I got back to the phone, he says, now put it under your fingernail, which I didn't do. And he starts saying, push it deeper, and he talks about the weather in San Francisco. Push it deeper. He talks about my kids and push it deeper. And this went on for 15 minutes. He said, now it's time to go to bed. Push it deeper. You can't pull it out. Push it deeper. And he kept going. And he would go in and out of common conversation to push it deeper. And it finally hit me. Kevin, just stop. I just want to die. Yeah. He says, is suicide about pain or is it about death? And I realized in that moment, suicide has nothing to do with death. It has to do with pain. So when we sit with people, whether it's healing from a loss, when we ask why, is that people are in such pain, the only thing in their head that they feel can get rid of the pain is by dying. Right. So it's not about death. I think suicide has such a big stigma because we focus on the death. Right. When we switch it and focus on my dad's pain, or when we're reaching out to help a family member, whether it's or a friend, as middle-aged men, we have the highest rates. If we focus on their pain of loneliness, this through divorce, separation, whatever it might be, when we focus on the pain, we have a conversation to be had that we understand. Death scares us and we run away from it, but we can do so much when we change and say it's not about death, it's about pain. And we can do something about pain, and that to me gives me great hope.